Thanks for listening to the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry, here to help educate, motivate, and put you on the right path to take control of your health through weekly discussions on topics in the medical field, public health arena, and in your community. And now your host, Dr. Barry.
What's up, everybody? Dr. Barry here, your favorite board-certified internist, bringing you episode 73 of the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. Today, we are going to be discussing mental health, specifically minority mental health, and we're going to be talking about, on the personal side, what does being the black physician mean on my mental health, and what are some things that I've done to cope with it, what are some struggles I've had in the past, and still can probably continue to have, right? And so I want you to sit back, get ready for another amazing episode. Like always, you can head over to drpierresblog.com/LLP073 for today's show notes, or head over to lunchandlearnpod.com and you'll get a listing of all of the episodes that in case you may have missed one on the website. And just like the motto says, remember to empower yourself for better health here on the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. This episode is brought to you by the Lunch and Learn Community Store, where we are living out the motto, empower yourself for better health. In the Lunch and Learn Community Store, you can get your favorite t-shirts, ebooks, as well as other related products by Dr. Barry. Head over to shop.drpierresblog.com and get a chance to get 10% off your first purchase by using the coupon code EMPOWER10. Again, shop.drpierresblog.com. Live out the motto, empower yourself for better health. All right, everybody. So this week's episode is going to be a good one. We are talking about a topic that I actually bring up quite often, mental health. In particular, this month, with it being Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, I think it adds a little bit extra, responsibility being a black physician in the sense of trying to champion the cause of what minority mental health really means. Why we again, it's just like, it's the argument that I sometimes get during Black History Month, right? Like, oh, why do we have to celebrate Black History Month? And the same thing, like, why do we have to celebrate minority mental health, right, when there's already a mental health awareness month, right? And I'm going to go through some numbers, right? Because I think for a lot of you guys are very visual, like you like the numbers, and you like to be able to put things into context, right? And the context, I think, is going to help us move on to where we want to be in terms of, like, okay, why is this important? Why do we need to stress, why mental health, especially in the minority community, is something that we really should be tackling on an everyday basis, right? So just some quick numbers regarding Black and African American communities and mental health, right? So about 16% of the U.S. population who identify as Black African American suffer from some type of mental illness, right? About 16%, right? So again, we can already see, like, that this is not a small number. This is not an issue that affects a small population, right? And I think that's key, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially when we talk about mental health, and I've talked about it, quite frequently on this podcast. And when we talk about mental health, sometimes we seem to think like only a small, smidget of the population is dealing with it, and everybody else is okay, right? When that's clearly not false. So these are just some numbers, right? I got these numbers from the Office of Minority Health. Like I said, we are so affected, right? Again, just a quick caveat: we are so affected when it comes to disease and issues, especially in health related, that we tend to have our own divisions, right? So this is the Office of Minority Health, Human Health Services, that says that African Americans, Black African Americans, are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress, right? 20% more likely. They are 3 times more likely to live below the poverty line. And we know that socioeconomic status plays a huge role in your mental health, right? So African American, Black Americans are 3 times more likely to live below the poverty line. African Americans are more likely to experience feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and worthlessness compared to adult whites. And unlike our the counterpart, especially with white, right? Like, we feel these things at such a turn, right? And again, this isn't just gender specific, right? It's males and females feel it at a much higher rate in that regard, right? And while African Americans, right, while Black Americans are less likely than white people to die from suicide as teenagers, they're more likely to attempt suicide as teenagers, right? So again, that's just telling, right? And when you have a subset of your community that gets affected by mental health at such a higher rate, like these numbers aren't staggering, right? And again, only about 13% of the population, right? So only 13% of the population identifies as Black American, right? But yet, like, the numbers are staggering, right? Again, 20% more likely to report suffering from serious psychological distress, right? 3 times more likely to be below the poverty line, right? More likely to suffer from feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and worthlessness, right? So that is a problem of, massive concern, right? Especially from as a physician, as a public health professional, right? Like, these are things that just continue to accumulate over time, that if we don't, do things like this, like celebrate a whole month where we're putting a flashlight on just the minority mental health aspect of it, like, we're gonna have problems, right? And what are some of the issues, right, especially associated with mental health in the minority community, right? I've talked about this on the blog when I talked about, the elephant in the room, right? There's stigmas kind of associated with mental health and seeking mental health, right? Like, again, I talked about how 20% are more likely to report it, right? There's a lot of people who don't report mental health, right? And it affects the African American community much more than it affects the other communities, right? So again, they hold beliefs related to stigma. They don't want to be open, right? They don't like to seek the help when the help is there, right? And it turns into trying to deal with it on their own, right? So they've never been taught to deal with these feelings of sadness, these feelings of hopelessness on their own, but they're trying to just essentially wing it, right? And that's a problem, right? I've talked in the past where, as a primary care physician, right, and obviously I know I hate that term, but as let's say the personal physician, right, the person who's usually on the front lines when it comes to healthcare, that you go to see for your annual wellness exams and your flu shots, right? A lot of times my patients would talk to me about their mental health issues before, going to see someone who's definitely a lot more professional, a lot more certified than me, right? Because of that barrier. They don't want to be seen as going to a psychologist, right? They don't want to be seen as going to a psychiatrist, right? Because for them, right, it says like, oh, I'm not quote unquote crazy, right? Like, that's always the wastebasket term I hear when I say, oh, I don't want to see that person, right, because I'm not crazy, right, or I'm not depressed, right, or I'm not anxious, right, I just have these issues going on, right? Like, they come with all these different definitions than what the definition, actually is associated with. 30% of people who have a mental illness are actually receiving treatment, right? And this is in the African American community, and because of the concern of the stigma, men are disproportionately affected, right? Because, and I talked, our men, we have trouble going to the doctors anyways, right? So now I'm telling you now that not only you need to go to the doctor, but you need to go to a psychologist, right, for your anger issues, right? You need to go to a psychologist for your post-traumatic stress, right? You need to go to a psychologist. Like, you start saying that, and you definitely are going to scare men away, right? So there's lots of different reasons why, mental health, especially in our community, isn't in the front lines, right? And I just kind of like the title kind of segues, right? As the Black physician, right, I understand the level of responsibility that I have, because I used to have patients who would come to see me just because I was a Black physician, right? Because the numbers aren't, in our favor, right? Like, I read an article, I think it was like a month or so ago, right? Like, in those who are getting accepted to medical school, that number just keeps dropping. Like, it keeps dropping, right? We keep getting less and less African American males going to medical school, right? Which means there's going to be less and less African American males who someone's going to be able to go to as their personal physician, right? Or someone's going to be able to go to as their surgeon, right? Who someone's going to be able to go to, right, as their psychiatrist, right? Like, so less and less people are out there, and we know the relationship of, if you have a person, that looks like you, that talks like you, that walks like you, you're more likely to open up to them, right? You're more likely to tell them, like, hey, I got all of these problems going on. But if you're consistently going to physicians and healthcare practitioners, right, who don't look like you, who don't share the same culture as you, right, you're going to be more likely to be reserved. You're going to be more likely to kind of hold on to your own personal issues and not seek help with a professional, right? Because professionals that are out there, right? The professionals that are out there don't look like you, and you don't trust them, right? And again, I already know, someone's gonna listen to this, and they're gonna bring up Tuskegee and all of these other heinous acts that the medical professional the medical community did, right? And I am 100% with you, right? I'm 100% with you that as in the medical community, especially in the past, right, we have not done Black Americans correct, right? We just haven't, right? And I understand if you had that stigma and bias, right? But I also understand that in this day and age, you have no excuse now, right? Back then, I understand you have no excuse not trusting the OB and your psychiatrist and your internist, right? But now, those things aren't happening, right? So because those things aren't happening, right, I need you to come see your professional physician, right? I need you to come go seek help when you need it, right? So that's that right there, right? Especially when it comes to mental health, especially when it comes to being able to be seen in the professional setting, because a lot of us are dealing with our mental health in terrible ways, right? A lot of us are going into drinking, right? A lot of us are going into doing illicit drugs, right? A lot of us are manifesting anger issues, right? A lot of us are becoming so repressed and so reserved, that we keep to ourselves, right? Again, the facts state that again we are attempting more suicide at a much higher rate than the white population, even though again we only make up 13%, right? So this is something that I think really needs to kind of be stamped home. The fact that mental health, especially in the minority community, is such a huge factor, right? And next week I'm going to have Maria Davis, Pierre again, CEO of Autism and Black, to kind of discuss, especially from a therapist perspective, right? The burden, being a minority here, especially in this, really worldwide, but especially in this country here, holds, right? And I think it's key, right, to really kind of stress the fact that in the United States, mental health is not something that, gets the fanfare. So you best believe minority mental health definitely ain't getting a fanfare, right? So again, that's why, I look up and I look forward to months like these, right? Months where they're what? I know this disease doesn't get talked about a lot, but we're going to talk about it this month, right? We're going to highlight it this month. And I like to think, of course, we have to always give credit where credit's due, right? In 2005, B.B. Moore Campbell, an author, advocate, co-founder of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, went to Congress, right? Because she said, we need to recognize mental health in the African American community, right? So this is actually her quote in 2005. Once my loved ones accepted the diagnosis, healing began for the entire family. But it took too long. It took years. Can't we as a nation begin to speed up that process? We need a national campaign to destigmatize mental illness, especially one targeted toward African Americans. It's not shameful to have a mental illness. Get treatment. Recovery is possible. Again, this is 2005, right? So she introduced this legislation into Congress, and that's how it became a month, right? Because it understood the importance of having to improve access to mental health treatment and services, and understood how this was really a public health concern here in our community, of getting to the point where we need to take care of the African American community, especially when it comes to mental health and everything kind of under the sun in that regards, right? I think the importance, right, and I want to talk about just me as, I'm segue just me as a physician, right? Just me as a physician, and being a black physician, right? It's very difficult to separate the two, because for a lot of my training, a lot of even growing up when I was a pre-medical student, when I was a medical student, when I was a resident, right? A lot of my training, it was difficult to subtract, and it was difficult to separate the fact that I was a physician, right? It was known that I was the black physician, right? And again, I remember in my class, I was at Nova Southeastern University, and in a class of about 200 plus students, right, there were 7 of us, right? 7 black students, right? And when I got to residency, I was the only black male resident. We had 18 residents. I was the only black male resident there. We had one of my seniors, black female, was a senior of mine, right? So there was 2 of us, 2 out of 18, right? So it was evident, right, when I would walk the hallways at Palmetto General, at West Palm Hospital, right? It was evident that, like, oh, that's the black physician right here, right? Like, that's like that person. And I didn't have to do it. Didn't take much to stand out, right? It didn't take much to know, like, oh, Dr. Pierre was taking care of me, right? And if for some reason, let's say for some reason the patient didn't know if I was the one taking care of him, they just said, oh, the black guy, the black physician, and then boom, it was already there. Like, they already knew exactly who was talking about, right? And this happens again. I talked about it earlier, right? We're getting less and less black males going into medicine. So this is something that's going to continue on, right? This is something that this isn't a blip. This isn't something like, oh, we'll take care of it next year, right? Like, this has been a consistent trend of having less and less black physicians in period, right, go into medicine. So I understand what the burden of being a black physician here is in this country, right? Again, I'm a program director here of 18 medicine residents, and I got 4 other core faculty members, and I got a lot of people around me, right? And it's not lost upon me, right, that a lot of my nurses who are taking care of my patients, right, are black, but the physicians, right, aren't, right? Like, it's not lost on me, right? And again, it's not something that I shy away from, right? Like, it's not something that, like, actually, like, especially but it has taken time, right? It has taken time to be comfortable and say, yes, I'm the black physician here, right? Like, I even joke with my patients because, again, sometimes I can see them having trouble, it's like, oh, I remember, just say the black physician, right? I want it to be known, right, that it's okay to, label me as a black physician, right? Like, it's not a problem, right? Like, that's not a negative effect, right? Even though, especially in this country, or real across the world, but especially in this country, right? Usually when we attach black, right, we try to attach some type of negative connotation to it. But like that, my goal, right, as as a black physician, right, is to make sure that when you say black physician, right, like, you understand, like, oh wow, like, he's the black physician, right? Like, this is like, I got to get ready. Right, like, I need to be more prepared, right? Like, I need to be ready for whatever the black physician has, right? Because he's gonna bring it. And I understand that I just don't have, the burden of, as a physician, having to be perfect 100% of the time, right? Like, I have that burden of being a black physician who has to be 100% of the right all the time, right? Because if I'm not right, not only do you knock you knock the profession as a physician, right? But then you say, oh, well, let's see, that's what happened. You get more black physicians, more minorities, and they're not as smart. Like, like, I understand, like, that happens, right? Like, that's I don't need to sugarcoat it here on the podcast for you guys to realize that, right? Like, I understand that if I mess up, right, like, I mess up the whole community, right? Like, the whole community goes down if you hear some scandal next year about Dr. Barry, right? The whole, like, oh man, look, another black male physician, like, down the pits, right? Like that's the problem, right? And it's a burden that is not carried by my my white counterparts, right? And that's where privilege buys you, right? Like, you don't have to take in all of the burden for the entire community, right? Whereas as a black physician, whether you're black male, whether you're black female, understand that if you do something wrong, right, like, they look at all of us wrong, right? Like, they look at all of us. Again, I talked about a couple episodes ago about that dermatologist in Atlanta who was doing surgeries, and they said she was dancing, and she was dancing, but they felt like, oh, her dancing may have caused a mistake to happen in the OR. I don't think so, but I've seen a lot of the comments, right? A lot of the comments, definitely made sure they noted the fact that she was a black physician, right? Like, it wasn't something that, especially at first I tell all of my physician colleagues who are going to go and do this online thing, right? And, become more publicly visible, try not to read the comments too much, right? Because people say what they want in those comments, right? It's usually anonymous, and it's usually something that it's not gonna come back to bite them, right? So they say what they need to say, right? And I remember reading the backlash and reading how the divide not only was because the physician may have made a mistake, right, but because she was a black physician, also because she was a female physician, right? Like, there were so many different layers associated with it, right? So I tell my colleagues, right? Like, I tell my 7 colleagues out of class of 2011, right? That the burden's on us to do well, because even though we're 7 out of 200, if 1 or 2 of us don't do well, they say, you see, This is why we can't get more of them in school, right? Like, and I'll probably have a podcast, maybe just like a video to talk about that, probably sometime this year, when I just kind of talk about just the bias of, these medical schools, and even and now that I'm a program director, these residencies, right? Like, I'm definitely gonna have like a podcast, or maybe just a video just talking about that, because it's definitely real. Like, again, it's not a coincidence, right? Like, we're getting less and less males and females of African American descent being accepted to medical school, right? Like, it's not a coincidence, right? Like, it's not like we all stop saying that we don't want to become doctors anymore, right? Like, of course that didn't occur, right? But there's so many things that happened up until then, that kind of causes the detour, right? And it's a detour that a lot of our other constituents don't necessarily have to face, right? So as the black physician, right, as the perfect black physician, right, and again, this is something that I may even throw in a shirt, right? Like, as a perfect black physician, I understand that I'm not going to be right 100% of the time, even though that's always my goal, right? Because as a physician, that just has to be our goal. We have to be right, especially I take care of patients in the hospital, in acute settings where, again, like, my decision could mean life or death. And I understand that it's a burden that I'm ready. Like, I'm ready for it. Like, I get hyped when I go to work, right? Like, I usually have like a soundtrack of music that I play before I step into the hospital, but I get hyped going to work because I understand that I'm going to be the reason why someone's going to be able to walk out the hospital, right? And I think that's important, because when you talk about mental health, right? Like, I know, and I think physicians are one of the strongest character mindsets that you'll ever have to be, right? Again, these are people who decided when they were in pre-med, when they were in elementary school, right, that they wanted to be a doctor, and they decided that, I'm okay with going to undergrad for 4 years, and then medical school for 4 years, and then residency for 3 to 8 years. Like, I'm okay with doing all of that, and then at the end being called a doctor, right? Like, that was a mental decision that they made. So it's not like being a physician is for the mentally weak, right? But when we talk about physician burnout, when we talk about physician suicide, right, and when we talk about all of these things that kind of break us down towards the end, it's usually because it gets chipped away, right? Like, our mental health, right? Like, the foundation of support that we need just isn't there, right? And as a physician, right, like, I champion all my physicians, you should all see a counselor, right? At least once, right? Just to say, like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with now, right? And as the black physician, I understand that, I got a whole community who are expecting me to be right 100% of the time, right? The physician community and the black community. And if you're not ready for, and again, this isn't something that just extends to, black physicians, right? If you're a black lawyer, if you're a black teacher, right? If you're a black manager, right? Like, you're a black accountant, right? If you're a black anything, right? Understand that, you've got two communities who are looking to make sure you don't mess up, right? So that's why it's so bad when we do mess up, because they bring us all down, right? Like I said, again, I was reading those comments for the dermatologist, and they were saying, yeah, see, that's what happens. This is why females shouldn't be surgeons, right? Oh, this again. So again, had nothing to do with again, we have no clue what actually happened during that OR. But again, people are saying because of her gender, right, she shouldn't be a surgeon, right? People are saying because of her race, right? Like, this is why they're always dancing, right? Like, yeah, this is something that happens in real life. And right now, especially in this political climate, where race relations are they've actually never been amazing, right? But people are much more open about how much they don't like black folks, right? Again, I've had patients who I know that, when I walked into that room, right, like, they weren't necessarily too happy to see me, but they really didn't have a choice, right? Because again, if he's the only physician who's going to take care of you, and you're sick, if you're sick as a dog, like, you'll just be taken care of. But I peep how they talk. I peep how enthusiastic they are with even my residents, right? It used to be so funny. Like, I would walk into rooms, and they would be talking to my residents like my residents were the attending. And then I'd have to probably say, oh, no, I'm actually the attending. I'm sorry. And, like, I'd have to redirect them in that regards, right? And, again, these are just some of, like, the microcosms that we deal with, especially as a black physician, as a black resident, kind of coming up. And, I address this podcast really to all of my black physicians, but really all of my black professionals in general, right? Please look after your mental health, right? Like, it's something that all of us need to make sure we're ready to deal with, right? All of us need to make sure that not only our physical is correct, but our mental is correct, right? Because it's a burden that may not, affect you today, right? It may not affect you in 2018, but, over in 2019, a piece gets chipped away, right? And in 2020, a piece gets chipped away, right? And in 2025, you're to the point where you're so exposed. Now, all of a sudden, it doesn't take much to tip you over. So as we end this podcast, I just want to again stress the importance of seeking help when needed, right? Especially if you're in the African American community and you want to see someone who looks like you, because there's plenty of resources there. In the show notes, I'll actually put some resources out for some therapists who are black, because again, who else are you going to be more comfortable seeing, right? Again, I used to tell all the time, as a physician, right, my patients would come to me just to tell me all of their mental health issues, right? Because they didn't want to see anyone who didn't look like them, right? Or someone who may have been on their plan, wasn't someone that they fully 100% trusted. So that that's real, right? So I will put in the show notes a link to some therapist directories for anyone who needs to seek some help. Even if you don't think you need to seek help, just having that in your back pocket so you know where to go and find it is even more key. So you guys have a great and blessed day, and I'm going to see you guys next week. Thank you for getting to the end of the show. I am your host, Dr. Barry Pierre, host of the Lunch Learn with Dr. Barry, and this is another amazing episode that we like to bring to you week after week on betterment of empowering yourself for better health today. If you have not had a chance, please go ahead and subscribe to the show if this is your first time listening. If you already listen and you've already subscribed, make sure to leave me a 5-star review, because your support is absolutely important in keeping the show moving as it is. And if you have not had a chance and you want to check out today's show notes, always head over to lunchlearnpod.com. That is lunchlearnpod, all in one word, .com, and you can get the access to my show notes for every single episode, but especially the one you just listened to. And I'm going to see you guys next week. You guys be blessed. Bye.